Good afternoon. My name is Kayci Petenko. So today we are going to be tackling the issue of how to forge a more equitable internet. Not to start off on a negative side, but as we all know, the COVID-19 crisis significantly exacerbated global income inequity. So me personally, I work with nonprofits both locally and around the world that are trying to address these issues. So I'm real excited today to have this panel of experts from varying experiences, backgrounds, and have different perspectives on how we can sort of tap into the Web3 world and the opportunities that it's going to present to us to try to reduce inequities, to promote access to resources, and to really provide those educational tools that we need. So with that, we're going to jump right in. I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to start, just to sort of set the scene for us, give us a little bit of introduction. What is Web3 and how does it differentiate from what we all know now, Web2?
Well, thanks for giving me that question. I think sorry.
It's right here.
On the side. Oh, the side, okay. There we go. Something turned on, isn't it? Well, that is a great question to start with, and I think many of us in this room have different ideas what the change will mean. But certainly, coming from the not-for-profit world and running Creative Commons, I really think it's based on values. And I think what I'm seeing about the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 and the potential that there is that you can have more open values and also be more citizen-centered. And I think we talk about users, some people were talking about end users, and I think we use the word citizen because I think this is really about what we know has failed in Web 2 and what we can do differently with Web 3. I also think there's such amazing new ways of how we can, there's Danny, welcome our final panelist who's coming on in a moment. But I think there's something about how we can do community differently as well. And these new models about how we can do governance slightly differently, how we can involve and be inclusive, because the word inclusivity is peppered today. And I think that's something I really see as the difference between Web 2 and where we're going to with Web 3. So I'll let the other panelists jump in the next question. Thank you.
That was super helpful. Thank you. So Paul, I'm going to turn to you. Can you talk a little bit about how blockchain and other types of emerging technology can really help to improve the outcomes of Web3?
So, I think blockchain and Web3 are almost exactly synonymous. And I think that the key issue in Web2 is that at its heart, digital networks are natural monopolies, right? It's Metcalfe's law. The more participants you have in a network, the more valuable the network becomes. And as a consequence, in the world of Web2, we live in this era of the golden age of digital monopolies. And I think one of the key ideas behind Web3 is that you can have digital connectivity, you can interact and interconnect in business models, but you don't have a central authority that can capture all of the value that's created, right? Digital technology creates enormous value. It presents incredible opportunities for streamlining business, for cutting out costs. But right now, almost all of that, in some cases, even more of it, is captured by the enterprise at the center of the network, not by the participants in the network. And so when I think about Web3 and blockchain's contribution to it, it's really about a more equitable business ecosystem where participants in a business ecosystem keep a larger portion of the value that they create.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to turn it back to Catherine again. Sorry.
All right, there we go.
Just to talk a little bit about what we foresee for the future. So what will the digital economies of the future look like? And do you think digital platforms should be open source?
Well, I'm a huge advocate for open source and open content. And I think the potential here, clearly running Creative Commons and the fact that we changed all rights reserved copyright to some rights reserved copyright, a system over 20 years, what we're thinking about, I guess, in the next 20 years, is that where can we also build a new commons, a commons where creativity can build on creativity, that knowledge can build on knowledge, that we all share. Because I think one of the great challenges and maybe perhaps dangers we could face is if we don't build on a commons, we could end up having just Web 2 and speed. And if we're not careful, we could do that. But we're all here today and we're thinking about these things. We're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, and we know that so much of what you are all doing in your day-to-day work has the potential to help us actually deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think just picture what we could do if we actually could do that together. And the commons is so much part of that solution. So I'm really excited about the potential, but there are dangers out there that we can't, ignore. But it's great to be thinking about how we can forge a more equitable internet together. And I'm so grateful to be here.
Sure. And Danny, I'm going to hop over to you quickly. I'm just interested what your perspective is on digital platforms being open source.
I think it's fundamental. I think I really see sort of Web3 as being less of a kind of replacement and more of a sort of sequel to the pre-existing webs. There was always an opportunity there that was taken to create open systems that could compete on a level playing field with proprietary and closed systems. And those open systems benefited and ultimately triumphed because of their ability to, as everyone said, collectively take the value and reshare it so that you can build a commons that creates a wider commons. Open source is an important part of that. I remember when people were incredibly skeptical of the idea of being able to build and create code that existed outside of corporate sponsorship and creation. These days, when I talk to developers, it's actually a little hard to explain to them what proprietary software is. I had to sit down with someone and I was saying, oh yeah, when open source first developed in the 90s, and they went, wait, as opposed to what? And I went, well, I guess like Windows. And they said, wait, I can't get the source to Windows? And, well, you can, but you have to anyway. So we're dealing with a generation now that sort of understands that as an important grounding in these things. I think what we haven't yet seen is the glue, the thing that connects all of these things together. Right now, we have a lot of innovation in the blockchain space. We have a lot of innovation in the Web3 space. But what we haven't quite got is the interoperability between all of those different systems. But it'll come because all of those systems are open, which means people aren't going to be prosecuted, aren't going to be handed intellectual property infringement suits by building those connections. So that's a very promising future for me.
Sure. So I think we'll move now from, what we think the future should look like or what we think it will look like, and focus a little bit on what people are doing now in the space. So I think I'll turn it over to you, Dino, just to talk a little bit about how you're currently using Web3 and how it's helping to decrease some of the inequities of Web2.
Thank you. Yes, definitely. I think at the UN Pension Fund, I can humbly and proudly say that we have embraced these technologies. And last year, we went live with a solution that combined three main technology: biometrics, facial recognition, a blockchain based on Hyperledger Indy for digital identity, and the global positioning system, GPS. And this is, I believe, an example of how the UN can demonstrate to its stakeholders and the governing bodies that it's practicing what it's preaching. So we heard, and I heard from my colleagues this morning, how blockchain, how these new technologies have and are being implemented in the humanitarian, in the climate protection, and so forth. So here at the Pension Fund, we have an example of how we made an effective and efficient use of this technology within the UN itself. We have an issue where we have more than 80,000 beneficiary retirees that are located in 195 countries around the world. And one of the main issues when I was appointed as CIO in 2017 was the only process that had not been automated in the pension fund was the process of confirming and verifying that our beneficiaries are still alive. The proof of existence, how to demonstrate that. And we are a unique pension fund, if you will. We don't have access to death registry, to mortality tables of each country. And the pension fund was put in a position of having to demonstrate a negative, which is impossible. How can, we were told by our oversight body, by the governing bodies, how can you demonstrate that there is no fraud, that you're not paying someone who's no longer alive? And therefore, I come from my background in IT auditing. I was in charge of the IT audit in the UN for 10 years. And the only way that for me, I could prove that it was a positive, to demonstrate, to provide an evidence that someone is actually still alive biometrics and facial recognition, and also to create an immutable transaction on the blockchain to be used for our oversight body to make sure that there is an audit trail that can be audited and verified. So I believe that we have been successful. We had challenges, and I'll be happy to share also those challenges, how we're trying to look at resolving it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Krish, I think you had some interesting perspective on what you guys are doing using Web3.
Right. I'll, take off from where Danny left when he said there's no glue in between. That's exactly the glue we are building. So at the foundation, what we are doing, it's an open source foundation. We are putting together a very easy way for even a citizen developer to create a Web3 app. This and basically what we call it the D-Plat, or the Decentralized Platform. And what this has is essentially three elements. It has a library of low-code, no-code modules. It has a whole bunch of connectors which will connect to the existing Web2 enterprise, the glue which you're talking about, right? How do these two systems talk? We can't wish away the Web2 systems. They've been there. They're very advanced, very good systems. We need to coexist. So how do you connect? So a whole bunch of connectors around it. And then, of course, there are some ways of doing the UI, UX, and some other modules for a citizen developer to make it very easy to develop Web3 applications. And then for the enterprise, building on this, they can take the open source D-Plat. They could add their, proprietary connectors or whatever else they feel is necessary for that enterprise app to be successful. So we have created this. It's very early days. We opened up in a limited way to some of the developer community, a closed community, and we were surprised at the kind of applications they have come up with, right? It's all around, how do you use NFTs on the marketing side, for warranty management, for tokenization of assets. We are really amazed when you make it simple, easy, and that's the goal of our foundation. We want to be the easy button for the world to adopt Web3 technologies, build on top of it. And what that also creates, because it's a foundation, the low-code, no-code libraries, the connectors, we are looking at developers to come, use it, and also build and contribute back, because it's a massive initiative. Can't be done by one company or two companies. We want multiple communities, whole communities to be involved. And all this sits on top of multiple L1s. We are L1 agnostic. So pick up the protocol of your choice. We are enabling one by one multiple protocols. And we hope to have a large basket of protocols. And the beauty of it is, if you use this decentralized platform to build a digital asset, for example, on any of our supported protocols, moving it to another protocol, the issue of interoperability, which was mentioned, it becomes fairly simple, very, very simple. We are trying to make it as easy as by push of a button, not easy technically, but with very little work, all these assets could be made interoperable. So that's what we have been up to, Kayci.
That's awesome. So before we move on to challenges, does anyone else want to speak about some of the interesting things they're doing in the Web3 world? I was just asking if anyone else wanted to talk about what they're doing in the Web3 world before we move on to challenges.
So
I can't. We all have a pitch, but after you.
I would just say, from an EY perspective, our big sort of R&D investment is technology called Nightfall. And Nightfall enables privacy on the Ethereum blockchain. And Nightfall is a public domain open source application distributed under a Creative Commons license. So it is truly open source with no strings attached. And our goal is really to industrialize privacy. We have other privacy tools under development, but the priority for us is to make it possible for individuals and enterprises to transact with privacy, not for the purpose of avoiding regulators, but really for the purpose of maintaining their privacy and maintaining their privacy from their competition and other things, not avoiding regulatory compliance.
That is something I think the industry needs, especially the enterprise customers. That's really great. Yeah.
I'll just add that one of the things I've been thinking a lot about with this, the sustainable goals is that this intention to reduce inequities. And I think one of the greatest inequities right now, because of the centralized internet, is how we find that we're seeding not just our data, but the location of our data, that it's ending up in these sort of central repositories. I mean, my throwaway line about the Filecoin network is that it's a decentralized storage network, but I think the thing that interests me most about that class of blockchain-enabled technologies is it means it's moving data back to being globally distributed again. And I think that's really important, because as we deal with more and more data, like in the petabyte and exabyte range, data has a gravity. If you have data in one place, then you have to move it somewhere else to process it. And if we leave it in these centralized repositories, that means not only do we see control of that data, we also see processing of that data. So one of the things that's fascinating to me, watching technologies like Filecoin begin to roll out, is we see that data being kept and processed close to those who create it and those who might best and equitably profit from it.
That's great. So we'll move on to challenges now, and I'm going to open this up to the full panel again. But I'm actually going to start with you, Dino. When we had a discussion about this, one of the things that struck me when you were talking about the pension fund, and you can correct me on the numbers, but I believe you said that the pension fund covers 80,000 people in 95 countries. And just the scale of implementing something of that size and something so new, you had to have had challenges. So can you talk a little bit about what they were and how you were able to address them? And if you think education is a key component of that.
Absolutely. So thank you actually for remembering all the details. Yes, indeed. It was quite a challenge also, because we went live with our pilot right at the beginning of the pandemic. And we had prepared this grandiose plan to reach out to our client in the various parts of the world, and all of a sudden we were prevented from doing that, and so we had to come up with alternative option, and everything was forced to become digital. So definitely education was the first topic. The second thing was communication, and the third one is verification. So communication is, again, we were, I would say, even myself, very naive. We thought, okay, we are going to deliver. We are going to offer to our client something that is in line with the Secretary General principle to include people, to protect people, and to respect their basic rights, for example, data privacy. But all of a sudden, we understood that there is an issue of usability. Communicating how to use an app that will take a biometric profile, then that will need to be used for people to confirm they're still alive, and that will be saved and immutable. And there were a lot of questions from our user. Also because it has to be recognized, the demographics of our users. And therefore, we had to revisit our plan to communicate a certain concept and to make sure that for them, was going to be transparent, that they could rely on the technology, but they did not necessarily need to understand how the technology worked. And this brings me to the third point, the verification. Again, my background is in audit. I immediately approached the issue as, how can I demonstrate due diligence in having developed this solution to my oversight bodies, to my governing bodies, as well as to stakeholders at large? What are today, I heard this morning, a lot of talk about auditing. But what is the meaning of auditing in a blockchain world? What are the 5 C of auditing? The criteria, the condition, the concept, the cause, the consequence, and the corrective action. Starting number 1, what are the criteria? What are the standards? I mean, the GBBC did an excellent, I think, initiative with the global standard mapping initiative. But then, what is the consensus? What are the criteria, the terms of reference for someone to confirm that indeed a blockchain-based application is reliable? So for me, I'm still struggling with that element. I've been working and following many professional bodies, but still I don't see a set of criteria that is commonly accepted and shared to provide assurance on the reliability of blockchain solutions. So that's definitely for me a big issue to be resolved.
If we're talking about assurance, can I chime in as an audit firm? So I would actually say, I feel very increasingly confident that assurance part it's not perfectly solved, but I think we are making tremendous progress. In fact, overall, I would say in my mind, there's sort of 5 kind of key obstacles to the pervasive take-up of blockchain and Web3. And the first one of them is, call it a user confidence, which comes with assurance. People talk about blockchain as a trustless environment, and this is one of the most fundamental errors that you can make. Blockchain gives you a choice of who you trust, but it doesn't get, and it gets rid of a controlling central authority in a network, but it doesn't get rid of the requirement to actually trust somebody, right? If you're in a blockchain transaction and somebody's offering you a stable coin, how do you know that that stable coin is real, right? How do you know that the digital token that represents some off-chain asset, if it's not a cryptocurrency, is real? The answer is you need some form of assurance or attestation or system of controls reporting. And these things are maturing. In fact, the technology to support these is maturing much faster than a regulator's ability to put their stamp of approval on them. There's lots of things that we've been waiting to do for a long time that we can't do, like pretty much continuous digital attestation for stablecoins. It's technically feasible. The current rules don't actually support us being able to do it. Some of the other key things that we're looking at, scalability. This is the one that everybody comes back to, particularly for public blockchains. I think this one is largely solved. It's not completely solved because we expect to see demand headed towards the hundreds of millions of transactions a day over the next few years as industrial companies bring on their transactions and individuals bring on more transactions. Today we can, public Ethereum can handle a few million a day, and when you add in layer two solutions, you can get to 20 or 30 million, and eventually we need to get to, our estimate is probably an upper limit. We need to hit about 4 billion transactions a day in capacity. But it's getting there. Third issue, privacy. I talked about that. I think it's gradually being solved, but privacy is really essential. You will not get enterprise users on blockchains without privacy, and you'll not get some users. Disappointingly, I have to say, individual users are already used to giving away their privacy, and they continue to do that. And then I think that the fourth issue, regulatory compliance. And we need 2 things for regulatory compliance to kind of go forward. Number one, we need clarity on the rules, right? It's not enough to have enforcement actions. We actually need some positive, let's say positive clarity on like what you can do, right? And then number 2, we have to figure out how to code those rules into a blockchain environment in a way that's scalable and doesn't kind of produce kind of system gridlock. And then finally, ease of use. Blockchain is still, for the most part, it's the domain of hobbyists, of experts, of enterprises with large IT budgets. And some of the things that need to happen, we need low code and no code, as the ZByte Foundation is doing. We need APIs, we need simplification. The reality is that most users and most enterprises are never going to have in-house squads of mathematicians and cryptographers to make these things run. So those are, if you ask me sort of the 5 key things that I think are sort of holding back mass adoption, there they are. All of them are in the process of being solved, but until they get completely solved or substantially solved, adoption will be a little bit spotty.
Just like to add on one point to what Paul said. This may not be a technical issue, but learning to coexist with the existing large systems which are there in Web 2, that's an important thing which we all will have to. It's transition. It's not going to be rip and replace, right? Because the systems are old, they're very solid, and enterprises are not going to throw them away and adopt Web3 systems. So we will have to learn how to coexist with them, slowly transitioning them out. And that's another challenge, I feel, but that's also a huge business opportunity. Every challenge, the other side of a challenge is a business opportunity. I do see a massive opportunity for everybody in this room.
I also think we can't forget the public interest in all of this discussion, and it would be remiss of me not to say something on that. I think the challenge, you talked about education, you talked about trust. I think today we've seen some really amazing world examples of what this technology can do to really kind of change people's lives. And I think we need more of that so that you can build public trust in something that's very new and very nascent. I think also what was really interesting when he was talking about thinking about big pensions or pension schemes, I'm thinking about individual citizens, certainly in the UK, with multiple pensions all over the place, and what blockchain could do to really help them be able to, when they come of age, to be able to access that in a way that's much more simple. And I think if you can show how practically you're making people's lives easier, and also much more, this thing that Danny touched on about interoperability, I think you said that as well, Paul, there's so much of that this technology can do. And I think we're at a moment where we can really see some of these changes. But today we're here to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals and a more equitable internet. And so going back to that, what are the three key issues that we're facing as a world? It's issues around food, it's issues around water, and it's issues around energy. And today we saw some of this discussion. And I think if we can show on those three examples that link to a more equitable internet and a more equitable world, we can maybe get people to come along on the journey. Thanks.
Thank you for bringing us back to our theme again.
Sorry.
No. So it's interesting, you mentioned privacy. My sister does privacy law, and we've talked about this topic a few times over the last couple of weeks, and we can't talk about it without her bringing up all privacy concerns and everything. So it's definitely a very real concern. Something else that has often come up in all of the conversations we had have to do with regulators and how the regulations are addressing this or not addressing this, the confusion that's out there. So it kind of brings me to my next question. And so as we're looking to the future and we're looking to sort of create the infrastructure for this, what do we need to do? And I say we, meaning businesses, nonprofits, the government, the regulators. What do we need to do in order to ensure that the results of this are going to benefit those, the most vulnerable populations, those who are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19? And this is for everyone.
One of the things that I keep coming back to is the fact that there's still so few experts in this space that can go and help regulators, and regulators are calling out for people who have expertise. And I know so many of you in this room have huge amount of expertise that can help build better regulation as well. So that's one just observation to help us. The privacy issue as well is an interesting one, because we have GDPR and other rules in the EU. You've got different things going on in the US and in other parts of the world that, you know, we're dealing with different systems, and yet we're trying to think about a global system often in this space. And so kind of that's a challenge, but also an opportunity.
Sure.
One thing that I think is important is I really think we need to call BS on some of the social justice washing, some of the nonsense that people spew out about blockchain. Blockchain by itself is not going to bank the unbanked, right? Is not going to completely transform. Like, I've seen a lot of sales pitches in this space that are not useful, right? The ability to sell people useless Ponzi schemes is not democratizing finance. And I think we need to ask, like, creating artificial scarcity, not helping anybody, right? Blockchain is great at managing scarcity, and we should be using it to manage the resources that we have a limited amount of. But I personally, it makes me cringe when I see people talking about how awesome it is that we can create artificial scarcity and drive up demand, or we can democratize finance by pitching more garbage, right? That is like, as much as we need to do positive things, we really need to be more assertive in calling BS, and the regulators need to be more assertive. I would like to see regulators be more assertive in taking down the bad actors in this ecosystem, because there are plenty of them. The number of enforcement actions and the number of bad actors are wildly sort of mismatched.
I think this is a generalization, but it is true, like all generalizations. I think that all these things are coordination problems, right? Everything is a coordination problem. And the thing that always gets me excited about new technologies like blockchain is they enable us to coordinate and work together to in different and new ways to solve problems. Sometimes less solved problems is create solutions that don't quite have problems yet. And sometimes we're just creating a new cast of problems. But I think the place that all of these technologies fit in is the opportunity to coordinate at a global level. And I think that's one of the challenges for governance. And of course, it's a challenge that the United Nations has struggled with since its very inception. But it's just become an increasingly pressing problem. And this is without sort of like connecting the two directly, I think the problem, and it precedes Web3, that the regulators increasingly struggle with is they're dealing with a global network, with a global community of people, sometimes coordinating in ways that they're consenting to, and in some ways being attacked and abused and manipulated and cheated. And trying to work out how to police a global network when we're still really governing at a nation state level is extremely difficult. I don't have an answer, but I would note that the technologies that we're building cannot but help work at a global level, because that's the nature of what they're building on. And so perhaps the opportunity here is to take some of those technologies and use those rather than fear them so much that you end up reining them in at a national level.
If I can just add an example, again, very small scale, as a practitioner within the UN, how we have adopted an approach and embraced the new technologies. We started with a principle issued by the Secretary General in his various strategies, starting with the strategy on new technology in 2018, the data strategy in 2020, and in 2021, our common agenda, when he spoke about the 12 commitment and the improvement of digital cooperation. So we try to align ourselves to those principles. And I believe that there is a need for a top-down and a bottom-up approach, where you have definitely the high-level principle, you have the framework. In our case, we have the SGB, the Secretary General Bulletin, we have the Administrative Instruction, Information Circular, but then we very much rely on standards that comes from the professional community. ISO standard, for example, standard of association, for example, in my former field, internal auditors, IIA, and ISACA, and so forth. So I believe that we can and we should make use of all this input, but not just trying to rely on overarching normative that try to holistically, comprehensively regulate everything and everywhere, but try to combine both the top and the bottom. Thank you.
Yeah, it's station credits.
All right. Oh, sorry.
I'll just add on, because whatever we are building today is for the future. The next generations, the generation Z, Alpha, whatever you want to call them, they will be the actual beneficiaries, actual users of Web3, right? So educating them, which is also part of one of the SDGs there, is very, very important. I think we need to start, and we, as our foundation, we have launched something where we are going out to colleges, giving them a platform, making it easy, getting them to learn what it is. And during that process, to the point which Paul brought out, telling them the do's and don'ts, the goods and bads, right? This industry has been hit by scamsters. We are all facing consequences of that. And we are hoping Sandra and the GBBC will help us with clarity on regulators and other things. But the regulators have their point of view, which is very valid, right? So I think educating the next generation is a very, very important aspect, which will help us, take this forward as it scales. This is going to scale. We have reached a level of maturity and scale where this is only going to grow. I'm very confident of that.
We have a question.
Because right now you guys are imagine what we're going to do. Why should an enterprise?
So this is a great question, and I think it's sort of fundamental to it's fundamental to this question of like fairness and equity among a bunch of other questions. So first and foremost, and I'll get on my hobby horse, and half the people in here will hate me for saying this, private blockchains are not a thing. They're just a server database with replication features, right? Second, what's the point of having a centrally managed decentralized ledger? Someone needs to explain that to me in a way I can understand, because I don't get it. Decentralized infrastructure, public blockchains, that's the value proposition, is to have this ecosystem without a central controlling authority. The value proposition kind of comes down to this. Every enterprise that I talk to, their first instinct is, I'm going to create my own blockchain, right? And then I'm going to make everybody else join my blockchain, right? And by the way, like when your biggest customer calls and says, would you like to join my blockchain? They're not asking, right? They're very politely telling you to join their blockchain, and their suppliers all hate it, but that's kind of the arm twisting that goes on. And everybody thinks that they can create the ecosystem and tax it. But honestly, there's a tiny number of companies on this planet that are in a position to do that. And frankly speaking, even some of them which have tried it have not been successful. If we want to have successful digital interactions at scale, I believe the only way they are really likely to happen is on a public blockchain. There simply aren't any scalable, successful examples of large-scale innovation on private blockchain infrastructure. I also think that the other thing about public blockchains is because they are permissionless, it creates a different form of innovation. Permission, I would actually go far as to say there's really no such thing as permissioned innovation, right? If there is a gatekeeper and they have to worry about the potential consequences of letting you into that ecosystem, then they will be very careful. You say, I want to do something disruptive to XYZ business, and be like, oh, could we get sued if we let that on our network, right? They'll form a committee and they'll get back to you, right? And so the answer is it probably won't happen. Fundamentally, if we want people to innovate and we want them to capture the value that they create without building new digital monopolies, we want to do it on public blockchains. Great question, thank you. I'll pay you afterwards.
We have another question.
I'm coming from the education side of it. I wish to see that everybody So I would love to see that GBBC take this forward with that kind of education. Because the misconception at the government level, I was with the Marinda biggest foundation director India. That's why I was about what it can do with nutrition. Which is the kind of the solution that we need in Africa.
Where all the red?
This is needed. Otherwise, we will find the same kind of confusion. They will put all kinds of.
It's an excellent comment. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? This is a good time for them. No. Okay, so because we have a little bit of time left, I'm going to borrow a question that Sandra used last year. What is one thing you are most excited about in the Web3 space for a solution that could help decrease inequities that, in the near future might happen?
Go in that order. Okay, so the thing that excites me most about all of these technologies, blockchain included, is the idea that they're ways of creating new public goods, new non-rivalrous systems that everyone can use in a permissionless, free way, but are generated by people seamlessly coordinating together for their own incentives. Petenko Labs, which are the people who created Filecoin, now support a series of other events. Once you're excited by this event, you can go and look at called Funding the Commons that follows this pattern. And I guess for me, and Catherine knows this because we talk about it a lot, one of the things that excites me most about these technologies is the idea of finally being able to build the promise of the web, which was an open library of knowledge for everyone. And there are a lot of little elements that have to go together to make that work. But I think that finally living up to that promise where we can store things and make them available online and they don't bit rot over time, they stay for eternity, and also they're available for all the world's population, whether they're students or people of all ages learning and growing and building on that. That's the promise that I really see in this technology.
Mine is very similar. Asset tokenization. We all get to participate. It doesn't matter, since now assets can be tokenized to the infinitely small level. We all, I think that's a huge thing. Earlier, there used to be an asset which only people of a certain amount, with a certain amount of wealth could own. We could all own anything, and that's going forward. It is happening as we speak, and it's great. We can all own a piece of something which we always wanted to own.
I would like to build on what Catherine said before. She talked about the basic needs, access to food, access to water, access to energy. Well, I would add in my case, access to having an identity, a digital identity that is really self-sovereign identity, that the user ultimately has ownership, not just control, but ownership. So in our case, I believe that our dream is that we have implemented a specific solution for a specific use case, prove the existence of an individual. And we are managing that process. But now that we have the ability to have a relative certainty about interacting with someone who has been identified, we can build on that. The possibility of extending and capitalizing on this ability are enormous. In fact, I tend to share with my colleagues and my chief executive officer how we can move from, we call it the UNJSPF Digital Certificate of Entitlement, and this is the name of the solution, to the UNJSPF Digital Pension Fund. Now that we know that we are interacting with the right person, we can offer all kinds of services. So that ability for me, I think is just huge in terms of capitalizing this asset.
And I'm going to add to what Danny said about knowledge and be really specific. And I know we've got 3 minutes and I want Paul to get in, so I'll be quick. But if you think still too few people across the world know about the SDGs, and yet if we had open education resources that could reach the many people would know more about the SDGs and more could be done about it. And that's just a very simple thing about what we could do. But you asked the question, Sandra, very specific. Over to you, Paul.
So I'll go off in a slightly different direction. I think it's great, all the financial innovation we've had for the last few years, but I think in the near term, what I'm most excited about is the creation of kind of global markets for carbon outputs and offsets. So blockchain really enables kind of a high level of transparency and a verification that you can do in this environment. It's possible to start looking at how much companies output, how much they offset, how to avoid double counting. Hundreds of the world's biggest companies have committed to be net zero by a certain date. Creating a architecture and an ecosystem where they can be held accountable and then make that happen is a huge near-term opportunity. And then on top of that, if we can figure out how to turn those commitments by enterprises into investable assets that support the investment against renewables and offsets and carbon sinks, that will be real. It's happening now, and I think it will be substantively useful for the world.
Great, thank you. I'm so glad that we could end on a positive note. I know I'm really excited to see about all the new developments in this space. So I want to thank everyone for their attention, and I want to thank our excellent panel. If we could give them a round of applause.
And thanks to our moderator.